All right. Well, thanks everybody. Hello and welcome to Control+M Presents. Today, our Veronica Meyer is going to go through some of the features of the Plex Label Designer. We get a lot of great questions on this tool, so we thought we'd put together a list of the most common ones and share that with you to give you the opportunity to share your best tips and tricks with us as well. So Veronica is celebrating her 1-year anniversary with Control+M this week. Veronica, we're just so glad that you've joined our team, and we're very grateful that you're willing to share your vast amount of knowledge with the community. So I'm going to put myself on mute and take it away, Veronica.
Hi, and thank you, Patty. Actually, today is my 1-year anniversary. What a great way to present and share everything with you guys. So I'm a Plex accredited developer, and I've been working with Plex since 2013. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've learned while designing labels. This is what we'll be covering today. This will only be about label design tips and tricks. We're not going to cover creating a label, printer setups, or label printing. The concepts remain the same, but the screens and some of their names are different between Classic and UX. If for some reason you can't stay for the entire session, or if you can't come to a session, please know that these sessions are on our YouTube channel so you can watch anytime. Our YouTube channel link is in the signature of all of our Control+M emails, making it easy for you to find them. Plex has 28 different types of labels. The most common predefined types are listed here. We're not going to discuss each specific label type, but I am going to show you what can be used on most label types. I'll be using the container label type throughout the presentation. When we talk container labels, we can have multiple labels to show the different stages a container can be in. One of the most common is a customer-specific shipping label, and custom requirements can lead to having multiple labels in your system set up for shipping. I'll be covering some of the things that you can do to a label to make it meet your needs or a customer's specifications. The Open Label Generator allows you to create a free-form label quickly and on the fly. This is great for one-off labels. You can add up to 4 lines of text and a barcode. UX does not support certain labels created in Classic, such as HTML and PDF. And if you try to use them, you get an error message. If you have a PDF label, know that only Plex can change it. The sequence on the label printed is based in its label type and status. To find when customer labels, suspect parts, or container labels can be printed, take a look at the label logic flowchart. If you had never seen this, let me show you how to find it in the community. So I've gone out to the community. I'm doing a search for label logic flow. And when I hit enter, I of course see the discussions, but the first article that pops up is where you find that wonderful flowchart. So over here on the right, you see the PDF for the flowchart. When you click on it, it loads. It's much bigger when you download it and you can make it a PDF and you can read it. In it, you'll find it'll ask you questions. So here's the container status. Is it defective? If it's true, then it's going to say, hey, print the suspect label, and it prints it here. If it's not true, then it will continue to walk you through the flowchart logic until you get to a point at which it will print a label. It's available for anyone to go out there and review. And we'll go back to our presentation. So I use a virtual label printer called a ZPL printer as my default label printer when I'm designing or testing labels. And this is how I'm going to show you labels during this session. First, you want to make sure that the label size in the ZPL printer is the same as the label you're printing. Otherwise, it can cause you all kinds of confusion. Do you want to send a label copy to a customer for acceptance? Do so by saving the label to a PNG or PDF format. The drivers that are used to create this label printer are from Siegel, and the extension is a ZPL printer application. The app can be downloaded from the Google Play Store. The extension, once installed, works with Edge, Chrome, and Firefox. This is the same virtual label printer Plex support uses. I'm not going to go through the instructions for downloading and setting this up here, but please email me for directions. My email is in the bottom of this presentation. Let me show you how this works. I'm going to pop out to Plex. So there's back to our screen, and that's what a ZPL printer looks like. So if I go into a label library and I want to print a label, I don't want to print all of them because there's way too many. I'm going to pick a label, and I'm going to say print container label. And there's the label that I've selected to print. If I want to change my label, I can just very easily select a different one and print a container label. And it prints a different version of that same container label. To go through the pieces of this, the little hamburger as we all call it, this is where you select your label size. So it's saying that I need a 4-inch wide label by a 6-inch long label, and then anything that I print to it will be represented within this size. The network information is its default information to be set up on. Leave that alone, and that makes the ZPL printer work. If you wanted to save this label to a PDF to send, you would turn on your save label, send it either to a PGN or a PDF, tell you where you want to save it, and then when you print your next label, it'll create it as a PDF. If I've created multiple labels and it's getting busy, notice I can scroll back and forth between labels that I've printed. I can go ahead and just remove the labels that are sitting there, and it kind of cleans the print queue as I'm working on it. We'll pop back to our presentation. So some of the common screens used in labels are the label library, and this is the place where all Plex labels, no matter what customer created them, are stored. Any label in the library can be enabled and used in your PCN, but they will not always produce the results you expect. Hence the big warning in the label library letting you know that they should only be used as reference only. Customer Label Designer, or UX, known as the Label Designer, is where you want to design a label to meet your requirements. Label Designer Data Source Reference are Plex data sources that are available to provide specific data on a label. These are by label type, and that's important because you don't want to mix a container label type with an equipment type, because the information may not be available when you print the label. This is where printing a label by format and serial number comes in. If you use a data source for containers at shipping, while designing a container label to be used at receiving, the information won't be in the system and the data on the label won't be correct. Nor might all the fields be filled in when printing with a sample serial number. Let me show you this. Again, we're going to pop back out to Plex, and I'll display my ZPL printer, which is sitting in a status of on. I'm going to say, here's my raw label. There's a default serial number. So if I clear that out and I hit print container label, it just pops one in. So that's a default serial number. It's just picking one that's out in the system. It's not the serial number that actually holds raw material. I'm going to actually force a serial number in there. And now when I print my container label, it's going to print the information that is part of a raw material record. So there's my supplier name Caterpillar. There's a control number. It actually has a heat number. And again, if I go back and look at my sample label, it doesn't have that information. So if I'm designing a label and I'm printing samples, I was like, oh, my supplier name is never showing. Always double check it and print with a serial number that actually has that information on it. That way you don't drive yourself crazy. So let's look more in depth at the Label Designer data source screen. The same as any other search screen, you kind of need to know what you're looking for in order to find it. I'm looking to see what quantities are available for a shipping label. Here are my choices using a data source that has the word ship and a field that has the word quantity. Of course, this means that all my inventory data sources are not going to show, and yet I know that they would be also available for a label. The classic screen, where I only search for quantity, shows many more data sources. Let me show you what that would look like. I'll back out. I'll make this full screen since we're not going to need our ZPL printer. And I can go to the label designer data source reference. In my data source name, I'm going to look for something that has a word build to in it. I'm going to hit search, and I see that I have 3 label types: a container label, a master unit, and a mixed load. And I have 2 different data sources. This one's the same data source for a master and a mixed load, but my container label has a specific data source for ship to. And then it just shows me only the data source field names that of course match my search function of build to. If I pop over into UX, it's going to look very similar. Again, I'm going to add in, this one will search for quantity. And again, there's my label types, my data sources, and my field names. Again, my field names all have the word quantity in them. Difference being, when I am in UX, if I don't put the % in, the quantity is in the first column only. So if I'm looking for something that has quantity in the middle of it, make sure you use that %. Pop back to our presentation. So suppose a label you created is missing a critical piece of information, or you want to add something to a Plex generated label. You want to copy that label. To do so, go into the label library and filter for the technology of label designer. Click on the configure header and click copy. You will need to fill in the name of the label and the PCN you want it copied to. When you name it, make sure the name is relevant, such as if a label prints 2 copies, or if it has a special barcode, or something else that makes it outstanding, like it's a customer-specific label. You want to make sure the name reflects that. Use the notes on the label, and when you're done, you can add an image of the label to the paperclip. This all helps a year down the road when someone else looks at your work, or you're looking for a specific label to copy. By the way, after the copy, you may end up saying, what happened to all the elements? If the label is able to be altered, it will be a Plex authored label with elements. Customer created labels may or may not copy all elements. If it doesn't copy, you can try a second copy to see if it'll pick it up. If the elements are not able to be seen in the first place, the copy of the label will not add them. The easiest way to know if it is a label that can be altered, check for the hyperlinks. A hyperlink that is grayed out is not clickable and cannot be edited. So see here, your hyperlinks are blue, and that means that those have designer elements attached to them. And if you copy the label, you'll be able to see the elements and update them. There are a couple of ways to get to the edit screen. One is to go into the label library and filter for the technology of label designer and access the label elements from there. And of course, you can always go to the customer label designer screen and edit the label there. This is the label designer and how to edit the label here. The biggest difference between UX and Classic is the pencil became a hyperlink and moved from the right side of the screen to the left. So you would click on the element type of text in order to edit that data line. In Classic, of course, you click on the pencil on the same data line. Well, now that you've gotten to the label designer, here are some tricks I use. I usually graph the label first, so I have an idea of my X and Y coordinates, starting from the orientation of the label. Add your lines first, and then your text. This graph is for a 4x6 rotated label. The 00 is the first data point to print. Never use 1, 1 because you need to account for a shift on how the label is aligned in the printer and the gap between labels. It is best to add the text in the sequence it will be on the label and to keep the raw data with the data source if they're going to be separate component or coordinates. This will make it easier to view the X and Y coordinates and to change them. Also, it's easier to find data columns later on a label if you know where on the label they print. Preview label gives you an idea of where the lines and columns will be. Sample labels print to a printer with a sample data. Preview label is not a WYSIWYG. In other words, what you see is what you get. It's going to have some overlapping text and columns because the size of the print on the preview is not the actual data that's going to print. To make sure you have the correct data, print with a serial number specific to the label you're designing. In other words, don't use a container at its first step in a routing if you're designing a shipping label, or a finished goods serial number for a receiving label for raw material. Very similar to what I showed you previously. Combining elements is handy because you don't have to move the X and Y coordinates separately. If you do this, the print order is important, and it's the order the data will print on the label. You can put different pieces of information together, such as the date, separated by slashes, or combining the city, state, and zip and country to print together, maybe with commas. These could also be entered as separate records, and this will depend on the spacing you have available on the label. Text blocks. This is a concept that can be hard to explain, but say I had a super long supplier name or a part name. In Plex, it's one field, but if you want to be able to wrap the text like you would in Excel, you use a text block. So I can wrap lines or justify text using the text block. Available for text elements only, the block length field defines how long the line should be before it breaks, say 70 millimeters, remembering that our label is laid out in millimeters. Lines per block field define the maximum number of lines the text should be wrapped within the block. So if a block length is defined, but no lines per block is defined, it defaults to 4. In other words, it's going to end up with 4 lines within the size of the block. The only way to know a block length has been set is to edit the customer label element. To force a line blank at a particular point within a text element by not using a text block, you first would create a new raw data element which contains the value /ampersand. Then add this to a raw data field within the customer element data section, using it to line break between elements. In UX only, there's a new formatter option available. Select the data source you want to format. In this case, I took the shelf date and added a formatter. I selected format date so it knew that the incoming data type was a date, and then I changed it from a 2-digit month/day/4-digit year to a 3-letter month, day, and 2-digit year. If you don't know the syntax of how to use any of these formats, use Google to find SQL format examples. To change the orientation of a label, such as you see here, set the size of the label from 4x6 to 6x4, and make sure you switch the X and Y positions if you're used to printing non-rotated labels. On each column, change the text rotation when you define the width and height of your text. Text rotation of rotate 90, sideways right, 180, upside down, 270, sideways left. Here you see the results of a rotate 90 and a rotate 270. If the item is printing at a 0-degree rotation, it'll print left to right as the label is positioned. Some labels are required to print like this, but most 6x4 labels will need to have everything printed in a 90-degree rotation. Look, there's a label with a 180-degree rotation. The label's status prints in a different orientation from the rest of the label. Let's get back to fonts. Want to highlight something specific on a label? Create a black box and add some white text in it. What is listed here are the coordinates for the first label. The second label was created the same way, only instead of raw data, I used a data source of container status as the value to print in the box. In this case, the container was at a shipping status. Another good reason to flip the visual cue to the bottom is the ability of the printer to support printing that much black ink. Visual cues of defective, scrap, reject, or maybe a quality check are other labels that would benefit from this highlighted block of text. Preview of the label will only show a black box, but sample printing using a label printer or the ZPL printer will show you the box and the value in it. Adding images is a multi-step process. If the image is not available, you will need to create it. First, I browsed for the image and I converted it to a numeric code. Then I created a generic label image by copying the results of the conversion. Once I had a generic label image named and saved, I added it to my label as an image. Here you will see I have the converted image on a printed copy of my label. While I use this over my head image, you can add any image you can convert, like a logo. You want to keep it simple. Keep a shape in a black and white so as not to cause issues when printing. You cannot see the image in preview label mode or by printing it to a ZPL printer. This is one of those things you need a physical label printer in order to see. 2D barcodes. PDF 417 is a two-dimensional barcode format. It is ideal for situations where large amounts of data must be retrieved in a single scan. It is capable of encoding over 1,000 characters to a single barcode. 2D barcodes are separated into sections by different ASCII control codes. To find ASCII control codes, because nobody knows them off the top of their head, I've listed a Wikipedia webpage for you to look at. To enter these special characters, enter an underscore followed by the hexadecimal value of the control code that must be encoded. So if you're making a record separator, you would enter an underscore 1E as the raw data for the barcode. A group separator would be entered as an underscore 1D as the raw data for the barcode. You see here the first element in the barcode is a record separator, and then a group separator, and then the code for a purchase order. Data matrix barcodes are another two-dimensional barcode type. The only way to know if your data is encoded correctly is to scan with a QR or a PDF 417 barcode scanner. I found out I've got one built into my phone that I can use. Chaining labels is done in the label library. Now, chaining labels is if you want to print two labels at the same time, two different labels, let's say. The labels have to be the same label type. In other words, both have to be container labels or master labels, no mixing types. Also, no mixing output types, which is another way to say printer languages. An example would be no printing an HTML label with a ZPL label. So maybe I want to print a label with an image, but I don't want to print two of them, even though I need two of them. I can create one label with an image, and I can chain it to another label without an image. I select my first label to print, the one with the logo, and I edit the format. Simply add the next label you want into the subsequent label format box. You can chain multiple labels, but I wouldn't go more than 3 as each one is a separate print job to the label printer. By the way, you can't test this with a virtual label printer because of that condition of it being separate print jobs. So, rule number 1, never work on a production label. And I bet you can all guess why. Rule number 2, customers change their minds. And it's best to have something you both agreed to in writing. A ruler is a great thing to have because a label is a grid. Something you can see through to tell where the lines need to shift is the best tool that you can use when designing a label. Printers. We're talking about labels you design, so printers that support these labels are a good thing. The printer has to be a ZPL language type printer. Which is best? A direct thermal printer, a thermal transfer, or known as a ribbon printer? Do you need more than one kind? How do you know which one is the what kind to use? And how do you know which one is which? That last question's easy. You open the lid and take a look. Is there a ribbon or no? Ribbon is a thermal transfer. No ribbon is a direct thermal. Also, many printers denote it by adding a T at the end of a model name for a direct thermal. But some models support direct thermal and ribbons, and they're hard to tell which is which by just the name. A direct thermal printer has no moving parts. It's got more expensive labels, and the print can fade over time, especially in hot environments or in direct sun. This would be a good test printer for shipping labels. Ribbons. You can buy labels and ribbons, and the ribbons can be a bear to change, but it won't fade over time. These are great for warehouses. In a pinch, you can use a thermal label in a ribbon printer, but you cannot use a ribbon label in a thermal printer. It's best to pick one type that suits your environment and design to that. It's okay to be creative, and you can combine any of these methods to make them work for you. I've not covered custom fonts or designing labels for continuous printing printers, as labels designed with these functions are not used by very many people. Now I'm going to ask everyone on the call for hints. What are you doing that I might learn about?
I know we have one question, Veronica, from Heidi. So let's start out with her. Heidi, don't forget to unmute yourself. Heidi.
Hi.
Thanks.
So I do have a question for you, Veronica. So if I have access to UX, which I do, and because it looks like UX might be a little more intuitive for creating some of the labels. If I create a label in UX, can I then turn around and use it in Classic? Because that's how we're running our production right now.
Yes, they are the same label library.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
And then another tip I have is you said a ruler. When I create my labels, I use a digital caliper. It is amazing.
That's a good one too. So in a hybrid PCN, a UX and Classic, the label designed in one side is available in the other. If you are on any of the UX only PCNs, or we call them Colo, those labels will not share the same label library as the hybrid PCNs. And those have to be kind of reinvented from scratch.
Thank you.
What other questions have we got for Veronica? Okay, Veronica, if you want to hit down the next slide, great job today. And everyone who's on the call, don't forget to email Veronica if you want to get the instructions for downloading and installing that virtual printer. We at Control+M find that really helpful. We're going to take a break for the holidays. We're going to come back in January with a refresher on some tooling before we go back to our MRP series in mid-January. We've got a big go live that's going to keep most of our team pretty busy the first week. So Justina will step in on tooling, and then I'm going to jump back in on MRP. So thank you very much for joining us. Please continue to stay safe, and we want to wish you all a joyous holiday season and a wonderful new year. Thanks, Veronica, and happy anniversary.